Welcome, everyone, to the Enlightened Canvas, where we explore consciousness through creativity. In each episode, I'll introduce you to a new painting, a new topic, a new way of thinking about things, and hopefully I will inspire and challenge your perception of reality. Now, in each episode, I'm going to start a painting. I may or may not finish that painting. If I do not, I will place a link in the comments below where we'll have a separate video that really is focused on just the instructional step-by-step, beginning to end, how to do that particular painting. So grab your brushes and open your mind, and let's paint with intention. So today's topic is reading patterns and seeking balance. So to do that, we're going to introduce this lovely little pattern of daisies. Okay, it's kind of hard sometimes coming up with paintings that kind of align with the topic, so that was a stretch. But it's a very cute little spring painting, very light. We've got blues and whites, and while it is a repeating pattern, what I love about this is it's super loose. It's not very defined and where exactly they go. They are repeating in a sense. Kind of got spacing here, but you can place them however you like. And for my my supplies today, I'm going to be using acrylic paint. This is on a 9x12 canvas. And the colors, you can see I have just a small dollop. I've got white, turquoise, and a bright yellow. Now, this yellow isn't what I normally use. It's called real yellow, but bright yellow. And then I'm going to be using 3 paint brushes. And you'll see I have a medium to large filbert, a small filbert, and then a tiny little brush to let me get to the highlights and strokes. As always, I have a dab rag and I have my water. So for time's sake, I went ahead and started with a blank canvas and did the background on that. So I wanted to go ahead and let it dry. When you're doing this at home, I would be using a combination of the white and the turquoise. Now, what I would do is I would start with white, put a dollop of white, tiny little dab of the turquoise, add that too. So you're making a separate section and mixing them together. Add the white as you want to lighten it up. And your strokes are going to be up and down, all the way across. Don't forget to do your edges. I always try and do those. Always forget this one and save that to the last, but we'll get that at the end. So to kick off our topic of pattern, I'm going to be painting and kind of chatting and, jaunting back and forth and just kind of sharing some observations and poking some interesting questions, if you will. So if I look back at my life and my career, life in accounting and IT, and then an art teacher, business owner. So I started out in accounting, and oh my gosh, you can't have a much more structured environment. So that is a situation of repetitive, cyclical repetition, balancing. But I loved it from the perspective that I knew if I looked hard enough, I would always find the balance. I would always find my issue. There was resolution there. So I'm going to pull on some geeky accounting terms. So you've got your standard accounting equation. Assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Every accountant can recite that formula back and forth, in and out. So that your assets are that's the one side of your balance sheet. And that's everything you own and everything that people owe you. And then you've got your liabilities, is what you owe others. And then you have your equity, which is kind of your stake in the game. That's your ownership. And if you think about that, there is a semblance of order. You're always seeking to balance. You're always seeking to find an equal placement. And like I said, I always enjoyed the fact that you'd find an answer. And then as life would have it, I moved into IT, which was an odd switch. But it was a situation where I was in charge of what I'll call a relational database. And again, without getting boring or whatever, without the geeky stuff, it was basically living a human what if formula. So, what if this happens? Then we will handle it like so. Simplistic. But what it did is it really strengthened my ability to look at and read and identify patterns. There was a consistency and a logic. And if something went awry, it was basically because a new factor had occurred and we didn't account for this new condition, this new interaction. So we had to come up with a rule how to handle that. So I was working on relations. So, with that, after I moved from IT, I moved into the world of art, which is an odd jump. So I've always had a love of art and a love of painting, and decided to open up one of those paint and sit type things, which was, oh my God, so much fun. I love that. It was a challenge, but it really forced me to use both sides of your brain. So traditionally, you hear right side is the creative, left side is the administrative. So you are both creating, and then you're living in this administrative, all the tasks, business world side of it. So it gave me balance, and I enjoyed that. I could actually, like anybody, when you're starting a new business, new company, you're usually holding two jobs at one time. So I was living and working in my IT world, and then in the evenings painting and creating and working on all of this stuff. And it's funny, I could feel my brain shifting. It was an odd sensation, is the best way to explain it. But I understand it now because I was kind of going back and forth on each side. So kind of jumping over to our painting, you'll notice I kind of started on the top. I worked my way down. There's really no better, worse way to do this, whatever works for you. And I've been taking my strokes and I've been using either side of the brush. You can use the skinny side or the fat side. I've been taking my strokes and working from the out in. You've noticed I'm kind of just creating this little star pattern. And I press on my brush a little bit harder as I reach the center. I do want to make sure that there is white in the centers because we're going to come back and put yellow as the center, and it'll be nice and it'll be more vibrant if you have white as an undertone. So again, just kind of working from the outside in. So, in this world of now you're a business owner and it's art, so you still got to do business and you still got to do art. I found that you're still using a lot of those skills. So you're watching the pattern of your customers. How do they react when you put something out? If there's a parade outside, if there's rain that day, how did that affect your sales? And you're just trying to figure out what the customers want and when they want it. So you can align your sales with what that is. But that's pattern recognition. So we're trying to read patterns and balance what they want with what we're offering. So here is my first big question for today. Are we here to reconcile our life experiences to find balance? I start off with the history and accounting and all of this just because I wanted to show that each life experience is like a transaction. It has two sides, and so much is going on in our life that we really don't realize it's really forming us and affecting and creating our perception of the world. Now, I don't remember where I saw this, but I thought this was like the coolest analogy. So you get my my ball of wisdom. Imagine that this ball is the truth. And the truth is in your hand and you're looking at it. Now, I can only see my side of the truth. You can see your side of the truth. I can't see yours, you can't see mine, but it's still the truth. And we're both ultimately still missing all the other pieces that neither of us can see, but is still the truth. And it's being filtered by each of our own perspectives, which is actually created by each of our life's experiences. So your view of the truth and my view of the truth are quite different, but is ultimately the truth. And now, if you missed my accounting reference to reconciliation, again, don't worry, very geeky. So I Googled, and I'm going to look down here because I've got it written down. I wouldn't remember the Google. So the legal definition of reconciliation is the renewal of amicable relations between two persons who had been at enmity or variance, usually implying forgiveness of injuries on one or the other side. So my next big question is, what if life is basically a balance sheet? So we'll kind of go back to that crazy, ridiculous accounting equation. So the assets equals liabilities, but plus owner's equity. So ultimately, forgiveness cancels out both sides. So if you have in your assets what you own and what other owes you, and you have your liabilities, what you owe others, and you cancel out what you owe others and what they owe you, you're left with assets and your stake in the game. So basically, you bring into this world, into this lifetime, your assets and from your past life experiences. And your assets are what you gain in this life through the experience of reconciliation and ultimately roll over to your next life or ultimately your stake in the game. So that was accountants will think I'm great. The rest of you are like, oh no, that was a tough stretch. But you know what? It is a unique combination of experiences. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to share with folks is how you can take a look, kind of raise up and take a look at, how life has really affected you. And not that things have happened to you, but they've happened for you. And in every encounter, it is a learning experience. So back to our little painting for a little bit. So I've got all the white on. So at this point, I'm actually going to just grab my yellow. And I'm going to go through and do some nice little center blobs. And I'm making them more oval. You can make some round if you like. I like the look of oval. So we'll go ahead and put those in. Now your white is very light at this point because we've only put one coat on there. You can choose to come back and make them a little deeper. And I would do that on the next step if you choose to do so. If you want it more translucent, you can just leave it just the way it is. I'm going to leave it just the way it is, just because I like the whimsical feel of the translucent looking. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my teeny, teeny, tiny brush. And again, if I didn't call it out, that was my smaller brush that I use. The bigger one is that I use the background. And I'm going to grab some of my turquoise. And I'm going to come in and just do some light wisps. And this is the fun part about this. This does not need to be exact. You'll notice my lines are just very light. You can also choose if you want this to be a very strong outline, if you want it to be a faded outline. You can go back as much as you like, and this paint will last a long time because it's really just tiny little wisps. And maybe underline the yellow. I'm just kind of making that C underneath, just to show that there is depth and the light is coming from the top. I'll continue that down. Now, as humans, we are constantly always seeking balance. So I like to watch and I like to observe. And had the fortunate good luck of teaching hundreds, if not thousands, of people at the studio in the art business. And I noticed very consistently when we would do a painting where there was you're doing a tree and you're going to add leaves, or if you're doing a um, sky and you're going to do stars in the sky, I would verbally have to remind people and go around and remind them more that not to place equal spacing in between the leaves or the stars, because everybody did it. So it's interesting, and like I said, I watch and I go, well, why are they doing that? What is this innate drive to do that? And I think to some extent it's that seeking balance. They want to place them evenly dispersed because that feels good, that it gives us symmetry, um, and that feels comfortable. And so I would have to remind them, no, there are no straight lines and there are no patterns other than I think there's a spiral pattern. That's another episode. But when there are leaves and trees, it is a random. So you need to cluster them together. But it's interesting in every class without fail. And you could say it and folks would still there would be this need to place them equally distanced apart. And then interesting enough, after so many classes, you talk to people and chat, go like, oh, what do you do for a living? Da, 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 and, it always asks, where you're from, stuff like that. And I would notice, and again, this is me watching for patterns. I would notice that there were certain types of careers that really jumped out on the canvas. So, for example, nurses, accountants, engineers, teachers, very, very distinct painting styles. Now, majority of the paintings would be stenciled or outlined. So we're all starting off with the same palette, same structure, everything together. But about 3/4 of the way through, as they're putting their own touches or kind of completing, I would notice that the nurses would always shrink it. So whatever it was would be ever so smaller and very tight, as opposed to accountants who would be very tight and very controlled. Um, Very similar between the two of those, but and I think it's because, control, nature, balance, everything had to be balanced. So that's kind of the psyche behind folks that go into that particular career. But I think nurses were trying to cure it. They were trying to shrink it. And that's just an observation. So who knows? Um, Engineers, colors could not touch. So it's like the food plate where, you've got this food and that food, and they have to keep them separate, and they are always very equal and balanced. Um, and then teachers, they have a little, it's a cross between an accountant, um, and it plus, but it's got a little flair. So it's controlled, but it's got a flair. So I think those, quite honestly, it's hard to say if I'm really picking up on personality a little bit, but it's become kind of a fun little game. So I'll kind of wait now, and then 3/4 of the way through, I'm like, okay, let's see if we can, if I'm still good, if I can still guess. I've had some really unique ones. I did guess a events coordinator. I don't know how I got that, but but what I'm getting at is the fact that it is a it is a human need to find balance, and we seek this. So what does this all have to do with consciousness? Quite honestly, it is the act of being aware. So if we are able to observe our life experiences and really understand ourselves better, and with that understanding, be in the moment with whatever we're doing, that puts us in a position to be conscious of our intention. And it is the intention of our thought that is behind everything that really creates our reality. So creation and consciousness, I think it goes hand to hand. So hopefully you have enjoyed this lovely little painting. Tune in to our next episode. And if you are interested in the paintings, we'll have a link where you can purchase them. If we're working on my website, so that should be up soon. And we'll have lots more videos for other painting instructions if you're interested. Thank you again, and have a wonderful afternoon.